the day my mother got arrested, she was wearing the same pearl earrings she wore to my wedding. I watched the officer pull her hands behind her back, and I didn't look away. Not once. I stood there, completely calm, and handed the prosecutor a small digital recorder, the one I had hidden in the HVAC vent outside her bedroom, and on that recorder was her own voice, clear as a bell, explaining exactly how much sedative it would take to make her daughter look confused enough to lose everything. That was the moment 11 years of trying to be a good daughter finally made sense. Not because it paid off in some feel-good way, but because I finally saw the truth for what it was. My family hadn't just failed me. They had been running a con on me my entire life, and the only reason they almost got away with it is because I loved them. Let's go back to where this actually started. It was a Thursday morning in early October. Cold, gray, the kind of morning that just sits on your chest. I was standing at Stonecroft Cemetery in Westchester, watching workers lower my husband Christopher's coffin into the ground. And I was completely alone. Not alone like only a few people showed up. I mean alone as in 20 folding chairs, every single one of them empty. No family. No familiar faces. No one who knew his name standing at that grave with me except the priest and 2 workers with shovels. The priest closed his book and asked if I wanted a moment alone. I looked at those 20 empty chairs and almost laughed. I told him, I suppose I already am. The sound of the first shovel of dirt hitting Christopher's coffin was dull and heavy. Christopher used to tease me for crying at insurance commercials. But standing there, staring at the raw earth, I couldn't find a single tear. My heart wasn't breaking. It was going cold, hardening into something I didn't quite recognize yet. When the workers finally finished, I pulled out my phone and called my mother. Victoria answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was light, almost airy, like she'd just finished a nice lunch. I asked her where everyone was. There was a pause. 3 seconds too long. Then she told me people grieve in their own way. My father wasn't feeling up to it. Darcy had work at the boutique. They didn't want to crowd me. I looked at the 20 empty chairs and told her they wouldn't have crowded me. And then she said it. The sentence that changed everything. She told me I had always been strong. That I didn't need a spectacle. A spectacle. That's what she called it. My husband of 11 years being lowered into the ground. She told me to go home and get some rest. Then she hung up. I stood there with the dial tone in my ear, staring at Christopher's name carved into fresh granite. And something shifted in me. Not dramatically. It was quiet. It was the moment I stopped making excuses for them. On my walk back to the car, my phone buzzed. A text from Darcy. Mom said the funeral went fine. Call us later. Fine. Like a dentist appointment. I sat in my car, both hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, thinking. Then I drove home. It was almost midnight when I sat down at Christopher's desk. Heavy mahogany, solid, serious, it was the last place in the house where I still felt him. His reading glasses were still folded on the corner. A legal pad with his handwriting sat next to the lamp. I ran my fingers over the edge of it and then opened the laptop. Christopher had been the primary financial support for my family's estate for years. He funded the security systems, maintained shared emergency accounts, and kept the keys to a lot of doors my family had gotten very comfortable walking through. As the sole executor of his estate, every single one of those keys now belonged to me. By somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, I had worked through every account, every access code, every shared protocol. I removed Victoria, Wesley, and Darcy from all of it. I want to be clear, I wasn't doing it out of rage. I was doing what any rational person does when they realize the people around them cannot be trusted. A necessary audit. Updating the authorized users. That's all. They weren't going to be shocked by what they'd done at the cemetery. They were going to be shocked that I had finally stopped pretending it was okay. The next morning, I walked into Rutherford and Crane, Christopher's law firm. George Pemberton, his attorney, stood when I walked in. Silver hair, careful expression, the kind of face that doesn't give anything away. Christopher had trusted him completely. We went through the standard paperwork first. Burial authorizations, insurance forms, the kind of signatures that feel like they belong to someone else as you're writing them. Then Pemberton paused, slid a thick folder across the desk, and told me Christopher had updated his will 8 months ago. He looked at me directly and said Christopher had left me everything. I waited for the number, expecting something modest and comfortable. Pemberton started listing assets. 6 luxury Manhattan lofts generating top-tier rental income. A private villa in the Hamptons, fully paid off. The consulting firm. And then he said the total. $8,500,000. I had thought we were doing well. I had thought we were comfortable. I had no idea. Pemberton told me Christopher had used a specific phrase when updating the will: if anything ever happens to me, I want Nathalie protected from everyone. Not from strangers. From everyone. I sat with that for a moment. Because right then I realized Christopher had seen my family clearly, probably more clearly than I ever had, and had quietly built a wall around me before he was gone. That hit harder than any of the numbers. Now here's something I need you to understand, because without it, what comes next doesn't fully make sense. You might wonder why, after all of that, the empty chairs, the dismissive phone call, the text that called my husband's funeral fine, I still went back to the Westchester estate that same evening. My therapist would later call it learned helplessness. It's a real psychological pattern. It happens when someone has spent so long being conditioned to return to a painful place that they genuinely can't imagine another option. You keep going back to the source of the pain because somewhere in your wiring, that place still registers as home. Even when home has never actually been safe. Victoria had called earlier and insisted. You shouldn't be alone in that big house, Nathalie. Come stay with us. It sounded warm. It sounded like a mother. I know now it was a calculated move. She wanted me close. Where she could see me. I rolled my suitcase through the front door just before midnight and stood in the dark hallway, still in my coat, when I heard their voices from the kitchen. I didn't move. I just listened. My mother was near the sink, her silhouette sharp under the hanging light. My father sat at the table, shoulders hunched. And Victoria was talking in that careful, low voice she uses when she doesn't want anyone to hear. She said once the doctor declared me unfit, they would take control. My blood went cold. My father asked uncomfortably if it was really necessary. Victoria snapped back. She laid it out plainly. I had inherited 6 Manhattan lofts, I was clearly fragile, and a doctor's signature was the key they needed to trigger an emergency 72-hour psychiatric hold. 3 days. While I was locked away for my own safety, they'd file for temporary conservatorship. By the time I could ask for a lawyer, the locks on my life would already be changed. Then she said the part that stopped me breathing. Sedatives. In my tea. Just enough to make me seem confused during the evaluation. And she mentioned Dr. Conrad, a family physician willing to trade his medical license for a cut of an $8.5 million estate. They weren't planning my recovery. They were planning my disappearance. I backed down that hallway one careful step at a time, went into the guest room, and closed the door without a sound. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let my brain follow them. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought. Christopher's voice came back to me. I want Nathalie protected from everyone. He hadn't just suspected greed. He had anticipated this exact kind of malice. The next evening, my mother placed a teacup in front of me at the dinner table. Porcelain, steaming. She called it a special blend for stress. I already knew what was in it. My father sat across from me, eyes fixed on his plate. Couldn't look at me. I lifted the cup, took a small sip, just enough to be convincing, then let my shoulders drop slowly. Let my eyes go a little unfocused. Let the version of me they needed show up at that table. The game had begun. And I was going to be the one who ended it. That night, after I was sure they thought I was asleep, I went into the guest bathroom with the secondary phone I'd kept hidden in my cosmetics bag. My mother had helpfully offered to hold my primary phone to protect me from being overwhelmed. What she didn't know is that I'd been a lawyer's wife long enough to never rely on a single point of failure. I called Pemberton and told him to activate the dead man switch. Christopher had designed it himself, an automated forensic audit, a digital trigger that would fire the second my medical status was officially altered or if I was ever hospitalized without Pemberton's direct oversight. Preloaded and waiting. Because Christopher hadn't just anticipated the threat. He had built the response to it before he died. Then, just after 1 a.m, I slipped into the hallway and found the HVAC vent outside my parents' bedroom. I unscrewed the grate, pressed a small digital recorder against the duct wall with double-sided tape, and replaced the grate. Hands completely steady. I had handled fragile, priceless artifacts for years as a curator. This was no different. I just needed to preserve the evidence before it disappeared. The next day, Dr. Conrad arrived. I was on the couch when he walked in, half-slumped, eyes wandering, responses trailing off into nothing. My mother watched from the armchair with that careful, hungry attention she was trying hard to disguise as concern. Dr. Conrad knelt beside me with a pen light and asked what year it was. I paused, let my eyelids flutter, and whispered 2026, then said it was March, even though it was October. My father paced the edge of the rug behind me, his footsteps nervous and rhythmic. And Dr. Conrad, a man who had taken an oath to do no harm, began filling out the paperwork. Certificate of Temporary Incapacity. Recommendation for Supervised Financial Conservatorship. My mother leaned forward slightly, eyes bright in a way she couldn't control. She asked if it would be enough. He said yes, given my recent bereavement and observable confusion. I let my head roll to one side and whispered for my mother to help me. She stroked my hair. Cold fingers. Practiced tenderness. She told me she was handling everything. The scratch of Dr. Conrad's pen across the bottom of that form filled the room like a gunshot. And that was the moment I sat up straight. The fog left my eyes instantly. I looked directly at Dr. Conrad and told him his medical license was about to become a historical artifact. The room went silent. My mother's hand dropped from my hair. Then the shock cracked into fury and she shrieked that I had tricked them. I didn't answer her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder. Pressed play. And her own voice filled the room. Clear. Cold. Calm. Discussing the sedatives. The dosage. How once the doctor signed the papers, they would take control. Every word, in her own voice, coming out of that small device in my hand. My father stopped moving. The color left his face. Then the front door opened. Officers came in first. Then Pemberton. Then Jonah Davis from the prosecutor's office. Dr. Conrad shot to his feet. He didn't get far. The officer informed him he was being detained for conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Then they turned to my parents. Attempted unlawful conservatorship. Conspiracy to administer controlled substances without consent. Fraud. The click of the handcuffs around my mother's wrists was the most clarifying sound I had heard in years. She looked at me with everything she had, hatred, terror, disbelief, and told me I would regret this. I met her eyes without blinking. I told her I wouldn't. My father's face crumpled. He said I could have just talked to them. I told him I had tried. At the cemetery. They hadn't shown up. I told them both. I had asked for a mother and a father. They had chosen to be predators instead. Then they were walked out through the front door, into the flashing red and blue lights cutting through the Westchester night. But here's the part that hit me hardest. The part one wasn't even fully prepared for. Because while the arrests were happening, Pemberton's forensic audit was working its way through 30 years of my family's financial history. And what it found was this. They hadn't just been waiting for Christopher to die so they could move on my inheritance. They had been feeding on me long before that. The audit revealed that $1.5 million had been systematically taken from my childhood trust fund, money set aside for my education and security, moved through a network of shell companies and falsified expense accounts maintained for over 2 decades. For 26 years, my father had handed me official annual statements on forged trust letterhead showing steady, modest growth. And I had believed every single one. I'm a curator. My entire professional life is about verifying authenticity, checking provenance, making sure what something claims to be is actually what it is. And I had never once questioned the paperwork my own father handed me. That one took a while to sit with. I wasn't stupid. I was trusting. And they had used that trust as a tool for as long as I could remember. All those times I felt like the difficult one, the demanding one, the burden, they were stealing from me at the same time they were making me feel guilty for existing. I had transferred $50,000 of my own money to bail out my father's failing business while he lectured me on financial responsibility. I had co-signed Darcy's boutique lease when no bank would touch her. I had shown up every single time while they quietly drained the account that was supposed to be mine from the beginning. I didn't call them to scream about it. I downloaded the audit, forwarded everything to the prosecutor's office, and let the paper trail do what paper trails do. Because recordings don't lie. And financial records don't forget. The case moved fast. Dr. Conrad lost his medical license permanently. My parents accepted a plea deal, probation, heavy fines, and a permanent legal restriction barring them from ever petitioning for conservatorship again. My sister Darcy moved out of state. We exchange brief, careful texts now. Some bridges don't get rebuilt, and I've made peace with that. 2 weeks after the arrests, I was standing barefoot on the deck of the Hamptons villa, watching the Atlantic come in. Christopher had always called it our someday place. Someday we'll just stay here and not rush back. Someday arrived differently than either of us expected. The villa had white shutters and wide windows facing the water. Standing there that first evening alone, watching the sky turn from gold to deep violet, I realized the grief felt different. It felt clean. It wasn't tangled up anymore with 30 years of confusion and self-doubt and that constant grinding feeling that I was never quite enough for my own family. That weight was gone. What was left was just honest loss. And that, I could carry. A few months later, I converted one of the Manhattan lofts. It's called the Christopher Anderson Resource Center now. It's a place for women navigating financial coercion and legal abuse, women caught inside systems designed by the people closest to them to keep them confused, dependent, and too afraid to ask questions. I know exactly what that feels like. I lived it for 31 years and didn't have a name for it until I was standing in a cemetery alone, staring at 20 empty chairs. The center provides legal awareness resources, financial literacy support, and connections to attorneys who specialize in exactly these kinds of cases. Because what happened to me isn't rare. The tools are different for everyone. Maybe it's not a conservatorship scheme, maybe it's something quieter. But financial control used as power over someone you're supposed to love? That's everywhere. And most people inside it don't know they're inside it until something forces them to look directly at it. Christopher knew that. He spent the last chapter of his life quietly making sure I'd have everything I needed to stand on my own feet after he was gone. That's the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, in a carefully updated will, in a dead man switch, in a phrase passed across a heavy desk. I want Nathalie protected from everyone. If you've ever sat at a table with people who were supposed to love you and felt like something was fundamentally off, like your worth was always tied to what you could provide, I want you to hear this. That feeling is information. You are not too sensitive. You are not imagining it. Conditional love is not love. It's management. And the people who practice it are very good at making you believe the terms are reasonable. They'll call it family loyalty. They'll use every piece of your compassion as a rope to keep you tied to something that was never safe. You don't need a crowd to reclaim your life. You just need clarity. The willingness to look at what's actually in front of you, even when it hurts, and decide that the truth matters more than the comfort of pretending. 1 year before I stood on that deck watching the ocean, I was at a graveside thinking I had lost everything. But loss doesn't erase you. It strips everything unnecessary away, and what's left, what's still standing when all the noise is gone, that's who you actually are. I'm still here. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not just surviving. I'm starting over, on my own terms. Thanks for listening, and if this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about people who were written off, underestimated, and came back stronger than anyone expected. The most dangerous person in the room is the one they never saw coming.